From the Auditor General's DynaLife report to a pending strike by healthcare aides and anticipation of a pipeline deal between the Alberta and federal governments. Time now for tonight's politics panel. And joining us this evening, Chaldeans Mensah, faculty member in the Department of Political Science at MacEwan University. And Najib Jutt is a political advisor and brand strategist who's worked on election campaigns at every level of government here and abroad. Good evening to you both. And let's begin with the Auditor General's report on the 2022 contract with DynaLife, a privatization exercise that left Alberta taxpayers on the hook for more than $100 million.
Their objective was to outsource community lab services. They went through this whole exercise, spent the money, and they didn't achieve what they wanted to. So you didn't get the result you wanted for which you paid taxpayers' money.
The AG's report, which was tabled in the legislature Wednesday, finds major failures with oversight, records management, and financial analysis after the province signed a 15-year deal with DynaLife. He says neither the department nor Alberta Health Services followed their own procurement practices and that he did not receive all the relevant information he requested, which could have impacted his findings. Chaldeans, how damning a report is this from the Auditor General? What's really standing out for you here?
Well, Michael, I think this is what Auditor Generals do. And Doug Wiley has done a fine job here in exposing some of these deficiencies in the procurement processes. So I think this is a very important exercise, and the government must pay heed to the findings here and the recommendations. First of all, the processes of procurement in Alberta departments ought to be revamped seriously. Also, I think he highlighted some of the problems with the sole source process, which ended up giving DynaLife the contract. So, yeah, from my perspective, I think this is a very thorough job. And the government, before it carries out other privatization exercises, has to make sure that it has all this duck in a row and all these processes are taken care of.
Najib, to what degree should Albertans see this landing at the feet of the UCP government, or is this sufficiently on the shoulders of Alberta Health Services?
You know, Michael, I don't know how many of these privatization exercises we have to go through before we learn our lesson that some things should not be privatized, some things should not be based on profit, and especially when it's related to healthcare. You know, and there will be no accountability. There never is. You know, in other countries, people go to jail for this kind of mismanagement. You know, we're talking about over $100 million of taxpayer money being wasted. You know, and also too, I mean, as the Auditor General said, like there was failure to cooperate, redaction of documents given to him, destruction of evidence. You know, I don't see how anybody isn't held accountable for this, and no one will be. In this kind of corruption will continue, and that's what it is. I mean, when you have wasted that much of taxpayers' money, and no one is held accountable, it's never going to prevent it happening over and over again. You know, and also to the other, we have to get consultants out of government. You know. This was based on a 2019 consultant's report that had a calculation error of over 25 million. You know, and we see this over and over again, where the government pays millions of dollars to consultants to come in and make these kinds of recommendations, and time and again the recommendations are not sound and are rife with errors.
Chaldeans, how does the outcome of this investigation play now with the Smith government, paving the way to allowing physicians to work in both public and private health systems, a dual practice surgery model, as it's being termed?
Yeah, I think the timing of this report is a warning to the Smith government to approach this new health care reform process of bringing in the private element. There has to be approached carefully. I think that from my perspective, they need to go back to the drawing board, consult with the AMA and other stakeholders, make sure that this process that they're intending to embark on has adequate safeguards, that it complies with the Canada Health Act and also is consistent with the Supreme Court Chowley ruling. Because I think this report by the Auditor General highlights the challenge when you embark on these kind of activities without adequate safeguards and de-risking involved, and having the stakeholders involved in the process.
All right. Next up, strike notice has been served by the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees in representing nursing care workers.
After almost 20 months of bargaining, the employer had fallen short, far short of delivering what is needed and what is deserved.
I'm going to treat this 72-hour period like we're still at the table. They aren't actually striking yet, so encourage them to return to the table, and there's still time.
Licensed practical nurses, healthcare aides, and operating room technicians could hit the picket lines as early as this weekend. It would be on a rotating schedule with roughly 20% of members allowed to strike at a time. The province has offered 12% wage increases over 4 years, what the minister has called a fair deal. The union, though, says that is not enough. Najib, what is to be made of the union not backing down here?
Well, I think they've been more than patient. I mean, it's been over 20 months of negotiation, and the government has failed to put forth an agreement that is satisfactory to the union. And I think they've been more than patient, and it sounds like they are giving one more try at the bargaining table before the strike is to commence. So we'll see what happens with that. But again, this is more efforts by government to erode the power of collective bargaining, right, and force their hand. I think that the union is being more than reasonable. And this is the whole function of a union is to make sure that workers' rights are protected, that cost of living and inflation increases are maintained, and that you can recruit and retain the best people, especially in essential services like healthcare and education.
Chaldeans, to Najib's point a moment ago, the union reporting today that it has been invited back to the bargaining table, apparently to see a new offer. But if it's not satisfactory, AUPA says members will still go on strike as planned. How much pressure is there on the province, on the government, to land a deal before this weekend?
Tremendous pressure, Michael. I think the government has learned a lot from the experience of the teachers. Obviously, it doesn't want to use the notwithstanding clause in this case. I don't think that is the point. They want to make a deal. I think the government is also looking at the backdrop of the budgetary challenges. But clearly, there has to be a deal because these workers are significant contributors to the healthcare system. So I'm hoping that the invitation back to the table is a sign that the government is willing to deal. We don't want a strike which is going to have profound impact on patient care, and I think that the government wants to avoid the situation. Moreover, Michael, the government also faces the potential for a general strike, so cutting a deal is the way to go.
Yeah, that is still lingering in the background as well. All right, gentlemen, time for us to take a bit of a break. But when we come back, the prospect of progress in Alberta's push for a new pipeline to the West Coast. More from our politics panel in a moment. Welcome back. There is anticipation that the Alberta and federal governments are moving closer to an agreement on a new pipeline. And the Premier says that may mean some members of the Carney government are going to have to do a 180 on past policies she calls bad laws.
It may well be that there are some members of his caucus who are not fully on board with that new vision, but I will know in a matter of days whether or not they're influential enough to change the direction that I think that the Prime Minister and I want to go.
A new pipeline to BC's coast would require lifting a number of federal policies, including the existing oil tanker ban. Pipeline politics have, of course, intensified in recent weeks, with BC's Premier repeatedly rejecting the idea, which as yet does not have a private proponent. Chaldeans, what's your read on the tea leaves here? Could it be that things are shifting enough that the Alberta and federal governments can see eye to eye on pushing forward with a pipeline?
Well, Michael, it appears that Mr. Carney wants to cut a deal with Alberta, but Mr. Carney faces challenges from within his caucus. There are elements in the caucus from the Trudeau time that are opposed to pipeline development. So if he's able to overcome that and cut a deal with Alberta, I think that would be positive. Premier Smith also has to show to his base that she is making progress on working within Canada and addressing some of these concerns on resource development. If she fails to do that, she could have problems as we head into the second phase of her mandate, heading into the next election. So there's an incentive for both sides to cut a deal.
Najib, we heard the clip of the Premier. That happened on Monday. What's to be made of how contentious this could all be just within the Prime Minister's own cabinet?
Well, it will be contentious. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we just built a pipeline to the BC coast, and we know what a quagmire that was. Eventually, Canadian taxpayers had to purchase that pipeline. And we continue to, socialize costs and risk for corporations while we privatize the profits, and this will be, I think, a similar exercise. And maybe this time the money will go the other way. But somehow or another, it's always the taxpayers that end up on the hook for these kinds of projects. It's going to be a huge issue in terms of consultation. With BC, with Indigenous groups. The finance minister rightly said, this is a concern around economic security, around energy security, and around national security. But it's also an environmental concern. It's also an Indigenous rights concern, which seem to always be pushed off until later on when we realize how important those concerns are and how they can hold up projects like this. So again, I don't think this is going to be an easy solve. I don't think that there's ever been an issue between the federal government and the provincial government, realizing that we have to recognize the energy needs and the energy opportunities, economic opportunities for this country. But it's always the other things that seem to get us into a mess and hold things up.
Well, and Chaldeans, the BC government has yet to back off its staunch opposition to a new West Coast pipeline. Where would an actual Alberta-Ottawa agreement leave Premier David Eby?
Premier Eby is following in the footsteps of former Premier John Horgan and really making sure that BC's interest in the areas of things like the tanker ban, protecting Indigenous rights are addressed. I think we could see potentially the Prime Minister and the BC Premier at loggerheads in terms of this so-called grand bargain. So we'll see. I think BC is in a very tough position because they're trying to work with the federal government on projects that they see as important to their interests. But of course, the bitumen pipeline is something that Alberta is in favor of and necessarily also creates tensions between Alberta and BC.
Najib, how important is it from the Premier's standpoint that this agreement, this memorandum of understanding, land before the UCP AGM in Edmonton in just over a week's time?
Well, she'll be considering that a huge win for her, able to negotiate something like that with the federal government. I'm sure the pressure is on to make it happen before the AGM. And we'll see. I mean, I think it is optimistic that, these conversations are even being had considering the relationship with the last Liberal government. So these things are always positive. I mean, at the end of the day, our elected officials working together for the betterment is what they're supposed to be doing.
And Chaldeans, from your standpoint, how critical a component is timing here?
The timing is important for both sides. For Danielle Smith, she needs to show a win in using this approach of Alberta autonomy within a sovereign Canada. And for Mr. Carney, he's facing pressure from Mr. Trump and needs to deliver a positive outcome in terms of resource development. So the stakes are high, and I hope this grand bargain will come into effect that pleases all sides.
That will be interesting to see. Does something actually come together in the next number of days? All right, gentlemen, we have to leave it there. Great to see you both. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.